Order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, and after the Pledge of Allegiance, please remain standing for a moment of silence for, in memory of two students who passed away recently. Daniel Hayes, a 19-year-old East Penn student who passed away on April 18th, 2019, and Kuke Paw, a 12-year-old East Penn student who passed away on April 21st. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first order of business is the introduction of candidates for the board vacancy. We have Jeffrey Jankowski and Naomi Winch that are here with us in the front now. I think we'll go along to the election. Do we all have...
Yeah, everyone has ballot sheets.
Okay. Well, we should all have ballots for voting. Does everyone have ballots?
We're just supposed to turn them in?
More coming?
Yeah,
If you want your vote counted.
no, they can't count it without me.
Tallies are Jeffrey Jankowski, 4. Mr. Smith, Mr. Ballard, Dr. Bacher, Mr. Champagne. For Naomi Winch, Mr. Byrd, Ms. Bauman, Dr. Levinson, and Dr. Munson. Or do we not?
I guess we try ballot number 2, if there are any changes.
Sorry, I'll just pass it. It's okay.
Results are 5, Jeffrey Jankowski, Mr. Smith, Dr. Munson, Mr. Champagne, Dr. Bacher, Mr. Ballard. 3 for Naomi Winch, Ms. Baumann, Mr. Byrd, Dr. Levinson.
Congratulations, Mr. Jankowski. Do you want to come up and meet your fellow board members? Shake hands.
Oh, congratulations. Thank you.
We do have to have a motion to vote him in.
I see you're splitting the difference there.
Thank you.
I need,
And you have
Wonder if she had it.
let's see, you have a login.
That's for a man.
He has a hard copy.
Okay. And Ms. Winch, thank you for being here. We'll see you in December, I'm sure.
Not worried about it.
Thank you. Who do I need to do this from here? Okay, so, will Mr. Jankowski please raise your right hand and repeat after me?
Just point of order, I believe we have to have the motion first of electing.
That's right, thank you.
Item E, appointment.
So item E on the agenda, thank you, Mr. Ballard. May I have a motion to appoint?
so moved. Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Well,
What?
Mr. Munson.
I just wanted to thank both candidates for agreeing to do this, because I know it's a lot of work in a very short period of time, so appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
I agree.
Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
Ms. Baumann.
Aye.
Mr. Byrd.
Aye.
Mr. Champagne.
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski.
He can't vote on himself.
Can't vote on himself. Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
Dr. Munson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
There'd be 8 ayes.
Motion passes. Congratulations. Now to the oath of office.
There we go.
Will you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, state your name,
I, Jeffrey Jankowski,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support, obey, and defend
that I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of this Commonwealth,
and the Constitution of this Commonwealth,
and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity.
and I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Official. Okay, next on the agenda is the report of the Student Government Association. Sajan Patel and Sydney Ciliari.
All right, to get started, we have our student government update, and we have our ice cream social event on May 28th at the end of the day, so our seniors can celebrate with each other during their final days at Emmaus. And then we have Extreme Field Day or Final Rivals, and that is on May 31st after school, so we encourage our students to make a team and have some friendly competition. And then our final event for the year is graduation flowers. So we will be selling flowers at graduation in the PP&L Center this year to friends and family of our graduating seniors. And then for some events that our class officers have run and put together, we have the senior ball, which was on May 3rd, and also the junior prom, which was this past Saturday, May 11th. And both events were extremely fun, and it was a very safe night for all of our students. And then back on May 3rd, after senior ball, we had the after ball event. And that started at 11:30 and ended at 4:30 in the morning. And this event actually had a great turnout. Everyone I personally talked to had an amazing time, and it was clear that the volunteers had put in a ton of work. So they had a bunch of games, plenty of food, and raffles to entertain our students. And they gave away tons of prizes, which included like mini fridges, gift cards, NutriBullets, and even a leased car to one student. So we just want to thank every teacher, student, and volunteer who had a part in making this event. Like I said, it was very fun, and it was a safe way for our students to spend their time. So we, and from SGA, we also know how hard organizing events are, so we just wanted to give them a special thanks.
So additionally, some other events that have been going on in our school communities. So these past couple of weeks have been some of the spring concerts between band, orchestra, and chorus. These events have achieved great success. This coming Friday is for the music department is the EHS Broadway night, which is at 7 o'clock in the auditorium. Some other events that were recently held include the college fair that was held last Thursday, May 2nd. There was a lot of success with this event, as well as there was over 100 colleges that came to give our students information about different colleges, as well as different military branches and trade schools. Some upcoming events we have include on Wednesday night, Wednesday, May 29th at 7 o'clock in the auditorium is the Senior Award Night, which recognizes the many accomplishments of our senior class. The following day on Thursday, May 30th is the EHS Art Show. Our students are very excited to show all the hard work they've put in this year with many different exhibits and projects that they've had. The next day on Friday, May 31st at 7 o'clock in the auditorium is the Drama Department's Evening of Theater. The following Monday, June 3rd, is the Underclassmen Award Ceremony, which will be held during school. And then later that week, Baccalaureate will be held on June 8th from 8 to 10 in the auditorium, followed by graduation the next day, June 9th at 1 o'clock at the PPL Center. And just on behalf of Sydney and I, we would like to thank the board for everything. We've really enjoyed this opportunity and this platform to speak on behalf of our student body. Sydney, add anything?
I would agree.
Well, thank you for your services also. Are there any questions from the board or comments? Well, normally we would let you leave now, but since this is your last day,
You have to stay for the entire meeting.
Ms. Campbell would like to say some words.
Yes, I wanted to echo the board's appreciation. You've both been exemplary student representatives. I wanted to just take a minute for the board as well as for the community to highlight the work that you've done, not just here as student representatives to the board, but Sydney in particular. She's been a member of the Principal's Honor Roll, the National Honor Society. She received the Science Leadership Award and Excellence in Academic Achievement Award. She's been a member of the Student Government Association since 9th grade, a junior chair officer in 11th grade, and she became vice president of student government in 12th grade. She's also consistently volunteered at numerous community events, most notably Spread the Love event at Emmaus High School that focuses on donating items to a women's shelter and an elementary school in Allentown. This year, she was also accepted into the prestigious Emerging Health Professional Program through LCTI, and she was actually able to take several courses and gain some great clinical experience while doing rotations in the medical field. And we certainly wish her well as she's off to King's College in the fall and joining their 5-year Master's Physician's Assistant program. So congratulations.
Thank you.
John, like his counterpart, is also a member of the Tri-Am Music Honor Society, the National Honor Society, National Spanish Honor Society. Many of you have probably enjoyed him singing in select choir from out of nowhere. He too is a member of the Student Government Association. He served as secretary. He's president of the Red Cross Club, a member of orchestra, Pennsylvania Math League, chamber orchestra, drama department, and he's also a Hornet ambassador, and I'm hoping I didn't miss all of his accomplishments. He's been recognized over the course of his high school career on numerous occasions for his performance in music, and he will be attending Case Western University next fall, and he has been accepted into their pre-med program and hopes to become a surgeon in the future, and I have no doubt that he will realize that goal. Congratulations. You've both been, not only this year, but throughout your career at Emmaus High School, as well as really in the East Penn School District, you've just been outstanding representatives for our community, and we know that you will continue to make us all proud. On behalf of the district, we do have a very small gift that we'd like to give you before you leave this evening. We thought you could take it to college with you, and I just want to make note, Miss Allen actually shredded the paper herself. That's how environmentally conscious she is.
Do you want to?
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's right, that's right.
Mr. Ballard, did you have some comments?
Yeah, I'd just like to say something, just in general. I've been on the board almost 24 years now, and it's an unpaid, thankless job for the most part. But the return I and many other board members, I'm sure, get is to see students like you graduating from Emmaus High School. You are representative of what we want Emmaus High School to be, a fine place of learning and a fine place for community involvement. And it's that payback that has kept me going at least for 24 years, and I want to thank you, and I hope to read about all your accomplishments in whatever field you want to get into over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. So now I will say you're welcome to stay for the meeting, but you're also welcome to leave. And we wish you good luck in your future and are looking forward to seeing you at least one more time on June 9th.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next on the agenda is request to address the board. I have 4. The first is Ms. Lynn Donchez from Emmaus on transparency and public comments/appeals.
Good evening, school board directors, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. I've spoken here before and commended you for approving the videotaping of meetings and have thanked you for acquiring board docs. Contrary to one board member's belief, I am sure you are pleased to see so far that except for one meeting, there have been over 100 views and sometimes 200 views of the video meetings. I believe this shows there is interest in the proceedings of the meetings, and I'm glad people are discovering the videos. Board docs make searching the agenda so much easier, and thank you. These are important steps in transparency and community participation, and I commend you for taking them. My appeal this evening is to ask you to take the next step in transparency and community participation. My request is that public input be invited for each item on the agenda as it appears on the agenda, after you, the board, have had your discussion and before the vote is taken. The item-by-item format helps both you and the citizen. It would allow citizens to hear the board discussion and to better understand the topic at hand before addressing the board. Currently, speakers have 3 minutes to comment on an item for which they really may not know what is involved in the topic. And by first hearing your discussion and understanding the many aspects of a topic, citizens could better make informed comments instead of second-guessing as to what to say about a topic they're interested in but have not heard the board discuss. The board discussion and whether or not you support a motion would allow citizens to decide whether or not to speak based on hearing the conversation. Perhaps their questions will be answered during the board discussion or by other citizens that address the board, or perhaps it could raise a new question, or a citizen may have knowledge to share that could aid in the board decision. Another benefit is that citizens have some flexibility as to when to attend the meeting. If an agenda item is toward the middle or at the end of a meeting, they may want to join closer to the time that the item may be discussed. People have told me they are interested in speaking or hearing the discussion about a resolution. However, they have other obligations, what makes it impossible for them to be at the school by 7:30 to address the board. There would be a better chance of them attending and speaking if the public comment were held at the time the motion is discussed. And I realize the meeting could move at a different pace than anticipated, but it does offer flexibility for those that want to take a chance. As you probably know, Lower Macungie Township and Lehigh County Commissioners use this format that invites public comment, first on non-agenda items at the beginning, and then item by item throughout the agenda, and then a final comment at the end. So this format works well for the reasons I previously stated. I urge you to consider a change in the format of the meetings for better transparency and greater community participation. I hope that one of you, or maybe more, will introduce a motion to adopt the agenda, item-by-item agenda comment format. I think it is the next step for better transparency and public participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Donches. Next is Michael Morrow on Communities and Schools, of MAS on Communities and Schools.
Good evening. My name is Mike Morrow. I am a 6th grade science teacher at Iyer Middle School. I wanted to take a moment to talk why I think CIS is an important investment. Teaching is my second career. My first career was as a social worker with Lehigh County. And what I learned as a social worker is that is deeply rooted in mental health. One of the main takeaways I had from that experience was that the mental health system is flawed. A lot of times what happens when someone's seeking those services is that there's a shortage of therapists, outrageous waiting lines, and oftentimes what happens is the people who need the services the most are incapable of gaining those services. And so I want to be careful to not reduce the role of our district to teaching students to read, write, and calculate. I think any time spent in a middle school, you can see that sometimes it's like herding cats, while other times it's like this beautiful symphony. But at all times, every teacher in each of the middle schools is aware that within a stone's throw of them is a student that is suffering or struggling in some way from mental health. And I think we play a critical role in that. There's been a lot of conversation about where the school district's role ends and where the community's begins. And I would say that our school is the community. We're a foundational part of that. And so we have a seat at the table for these children who are forming their identity. And if we're able to do something about that, I would urge you to consider that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrow. Next is Ann Breidenbach of Allentown on Communities and Schools.
Good evening. Tonight, I'm here to talk about adding community in schools to the middle school level. As a community member, a mother, and a teacher, I am greatly concerned how non-academic obstacles are impeding the academic potential of our students. Throughout my 18 years of teaching in both the Allentown School District and the East Penn School District, I have seen that these obstacles are significant and ongoing, but we have the opportunity to change that right now. Community in Schools is a wonderful organization that works on eliminating these non-academic barriers, such as behaviors, attendance, social-emotional learning, and family engagement, by providing students the services that they need to be successful. I know that there has been a lot of conversation on whose responsibility this is. For me, it doesn't matter who should be responsible. What matters is that this needs to be taken care of so that the children can be successful in school. Firsthand, I have seen the effects these needs have on the education of our students, such as disengagement in the classroom. And I believe that we need to do all that we can to give the students an opportunity to be successful. The school psychologists and counselors have very large caseloads and need support handling students who have more in-depth needs. Partnering with Community in Schools can provide this much-needed support, putting students on a path to success. I believe this is the responsibility of all of us to be involved and help the students where they need it the most. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Breidenbach. The final request to address the board is from Barbara Tantaros of Emmaus on points of interest and concerns of East Penn's taxpayers.
I want to thank you for allowing me to address the board tonight. And as noted on today's agenda, the usual scheduling of the public's opportunity to address the board has been rearranged to follow the introduction and the vote on choosing a person to fill the vacancy on the board that was left by the resignation of Mr. Flanders. I realize that the board wants a full board prior to opening of this meeting. However, I have obtained some information from the PSBA that will be of interest to the public and to the taxpayers of East Penn School District. And for those of you who do not know what the PSBA is, it is the Pennsylvania School Board Association. They are quoted as saying that what this board is doing is very rare. Historically, the majority of school boards follow the protocol that requires the vacancy to be advertised and then interviews in order to select a person to fill that vacancy. In addition, I've learned that Justin Simmons has also taken an interest in this situation and is researching whether or not choosing someone who is also running in an upcoming election, which is next Tuesday's primary, which is only a week away, would also be very rare and very irregular. I have a few facts that I know most of you like to hear because you're people who deal with facts. The two aforementioned candidates that the board has chosen to vote on, and have voted on tonight, are running in this primary election next Tuesday. No one else that is presently running was even considered. At last school board meeting on April 8th, School Board Director Charles Ballard is quoted as having warned the board against choosing someone running in an upcoming election. He's also quoted as having said that by doing so would give that person a leg up and additional media coverage leading up to that election. His warnings were not heeded. Thirdly, another board member, who I will not mention because I watched the YouTube videos, is also quoted as saying at that meeting, "If we do not interview, we don't have to advertise." All of this can be seen on the YouTube channel of our East Penn School Board meetings, and hopefully they won't edit those statements. The handling of the filling of this vacancy, of this open seat on our school board, is a flagrant disregard of proper protocol to ensure the process is transparent, upstanding, and equitable. The insular and secretive nature of these backdoor board discussions and decisions leave a strong whiff of insider politics that goes on, leaving the public on the outside looking in. This strips the board of its promises of transparency, as I was told, its responsibility to uphold proper protocol, and calls into question the integrity of the entire process. This, the public should not allow. The taxpayers and students of East Penn deserve and expect better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tinteros. Next on the agenda is approval of minutes. May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Next on the agenda is a presentation on middle-level computer curriculum.
I'd like to ask that our presenters for tonight, Mike Mahalik, who's our curriculum and instruction supervisor for secondary STEM. He is joined by Brent Haley, who is a computer and business applications teacher and also our department chair for that group, and he's currently at Eyre Middle School. And then also joining our group is Jen Carolla, who's a guidance counselor at Emmaus High School, and she is also a department chair. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our team, who will provide the board and the community with an overview of the curriculum revision and where we go from here.
Thank you. So I'd like to start off by going over just some highlights in the timeline of the curriculum revision process that we have gone through. So I came in, if you remember, back in November, and the process started over a year ago. Mrs. Whitman, with the grade 6 and 7 teachers, they revised the 6 and 7 curriculum. That was last year. This year they have piloted that. This past February, in my role, I was able to work with those teachers, and we revised the grade 8 curriculum with hopes that next year that it is piloted, and then after that year we're in full adoption. So the timeline is off to the right, as you guys have already seen before. Before I go any further, I want to make sure that this is clear. The 6 through 8 computer curriculum is part of an exploratory program, so the kids, the students that are in this, are getting this in a 12-week format. It's a trimester format. The grade 6, 7, and 8 highlights, I'm going to leave that for Mr. Haley to go into more detail about that. But in general, what I'm really happy and proud to present to you is a curriculum that is aligned to various standards. We've got computer technology standards being hit, as well as career and education standards, which is pretty exciting. There's a variety of topics that you're going to hear more about, but one of the highlights that I really do want to stress is that this is going to introduce all of our students at the middle level of computer science, and hopefully get a little bit more interest to all of our students when it comes to STEM-related fields. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Haley, who will go into more detail with each grade.
For the past few years, we have included digital literacy topics in our 6th grade course. In the new curriculum, we have implemented a more robust teaching of digital literacy and safe behaviors when online. Some topics include choosing a computer system and software, which talks about viruses, wireless communications, protecting one's identity, digital resources, and especially digital relationships and respect. With the new implementation, we have begun teaching more career awareness. Students complete surveys that relate to their interests and skills to possible career choices. These career choices are researched and evaluated. We then create a career portfolio website using Google Sites that students will continue to develop throughout their middle school years. This past year, we have begun implementing more coding skills in 7th grade. We will continue to use block coding at this level in different environments such as Scratch and Make Code. We have had a very successful year using microbits and breadboards to increase the capabilities of these powerful small external devices that will provide a physical approach to coding. In addition to coding, we incorporate a global approach to financial literacy. Students will research different countries and create a travel publication that will detail a trip budget and look at global currencies. Our plan for 8th grade computers is to continue coding but begin using more of the programming language JavaScript to create mobile apps. In addition to coding, we will explore photo editing and websites. The overall big idea is to have students explore a community need and begin a business that incorporates a marketing plan, including advertisements, websites, and an app for that particular business. Mrs. Carolla will talk more about the career standards.
Thank you. As Mr. Mahalik and Mr. Haley indicated, we're really excited that this year we were able to, in the curriculum, be able to integrate the career education and work standards. And so I wanted to just take a few moments to give you the background of those standards and why they're so important. If you may recall, last year, the U.S. Department of Education adopted the Pennsylvania Every Student Succeed Act plan. As part of that plan, the Future Ready PA Index was introduced. This index is meant as the public-facing report card for school districts, and it's intended to be a more holistic, comprehensive evaluative tool regarding the progress and the success of school districts. Within that index, there are 3 primary measures that we're responsible for. Those measures are state assessment measures, on-track measures, which would include English language learner progress as well as attendance, and the third component of the index is career and readiness benchmarks. Within those career and readiness benchmarks, students are responsible for demonstrating meaningful engagement and exploration of careers, and they all have to be aligned to the Pennsylvania Career and Education Work Standards. Students are also required to develop an individualized career plan by the end of 8th grade. As part of the standards, there are 4 main strands: career awareness and preparation, career acquisition, career retention and advancement, as well as entrepreneurship. As Mr. Haley indicated, it's a natural integration of his curriculum to bring in some of these career and education work strands. So as far as awareness and preparation, he's doing career exploration and his teachers are doing career exploration with students. When he talks about financial literacy and budgeting, that falls under retention and advancement. And then in the 8th grade curriculum, the entrepreneurship is highlighted. In addition, he alluded to the career portfolio that students will be developing in 6th grade. That portfolio, digital, will follow them through not only middle school, but also the secondary level at the high school. This way, it will be a culmination of all the career exploration activities that our students have actually done from elementary through high school. It's really of paramount importance that the integration of CEW standards and career readiness is a shared responsibility across all academic disciplines, as well as all East Penn School District school counselors. Not only is there value in being able to check the box for the state requirements at the end of that 8th grade year or the end of that 11th grade year, but well beyond that is the engagement of students into post-secondary planning. So helping students to identify the career opportunities that are available to them, to identify their interests and their abilities, their skill sets. It develops a sense of passion and a sense of connectedness to what they are learning in the classroom and how it will impact their future. So it is with much kudos to Mr. Mahalik, Mr. Haley, and the middle level computer and business teachers that they've not only recognized the importance of adding these standards into their curriculum, but the value and the impact that it will have on the greater student engagement piece. And the more that what we know is that the more that students are engaged in their learning, the potential for academic achievement increases.
And the final piece that I'd like to talk about is just the course implementation costs. We're able to implement this curriculum within the existing technology that we do have at both middle schools. The only exception would be these 2 items that are up on the screen right now, the $3,500 last year, and then again for next year that is going to be used for coding and physical computing supplies. But like I said before, beyond that, everything, both of those items are within the C&I budget. Beyond that, everything else is being able to, or it's able to be done within the existing technology that we do have. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any board members have questions? Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, it isn't strictly on this program, which I'm very glad to see that you have in place because it does meet a number of things, making our students career and technically ready. But I was puzzled by the statement about choosing a computer system and linking it to viruses and other forms of malware. Could you explain, I hope that you're not pushing one system as being better than another in terms of negating those?
Not at all. We look at a scenario and provide different research items and come up with their own solution to solving those problems. So it's definitely not one platform as opposed to another.
Okay, thanks. I hope not, because they're all subject to about the same amount in real life. Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
I had a quick, more of a comment more than anything, and a slight request. First, thank you for putting this together. I was wondering if at a future date, if you were able to do a presentation like this again, if it would be possible to bring examples of what some of the digital learning experiences that you're talking about look like in the classroom. And the reason why I say that is because the board and the community are pretty familiar with the core subjects. You know, you get a pretty good idea what a physics classroom looks like, what a 5-paragraph expository essay would look like. But things like Scratch and block programming, there's a very small segment of the population that really understands what those things are and the power behind them, because it is so new, and incorporating these things into our classroom is new. I think the board and the community understands the purpose of the focus on college and career readiness and some of those pieces. So if we could have some sort of a concrete example of what those things look like in the classroom, it would go a very long way to connecting what's happening already, and all those great things that are happening already in our classrooms, to the community members that are relying on us to get our kids career and college ready. And the reason why I thought about that, and I don't want to take Mrs. Campbell's thunder from a later part of the meeting tonight, but there was a experience that was offered to some of the members of our community where they got to go out into the classrooms and kind of see what was going on. And one of the comments that I heard or read about was that some of the community members were very impressed by the level of integration of technology in the classroom. So anything that we can do to further share that with the community at large, I think would be extremely beneficial to everyone. So thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think that's a great idea. Some of the stuff with the technology is hard for a lot of people to understand because it's so rapidly changing and it's new. It's not the way that we were brought up. It's not the way that we were educated. So I'd be more than happy to put that together. Thank you.
Dr. Levinson?
First, I'd like to comment that I'm very impressed with the breadth of this 3-year program for computing and learning. But I have two questions. The first question is, I know that at some point, and for my kids it was in 6th grade, they learned keyboarding and typing. Is that still going to be part of this experience, or is that taught in a separate?
The keyboarding currently is not part of our middle school curriculum.
It's not, okay. Has it been?
Prior, Mr. Hill, you could probably speak more to that. It has been. Do you want?
Yeah, I mean, we're currently phasing the keyboarding component out of the curriculum.
Okay. Because personally, I look back at that as being a useful skill. They were able to learn it earlier than when I learned how to touch type. So again, with having to do so much with the computing, knowing how to type and type quickly, I think has value. So I don't know avenue to try and bring that in or not. Certainly don't want to take away from what this what you're proposing, what's going to be implemented here. My second question is, a lot of these topics you can go into some great depth, and I know some students find this more natural than others. How is this going to be taught to handle students of varied ability? Because some students are just natural coders, others are this is very not easy for them. So
yeah, that's why in 7th grade we're going to stick with the block coding, which makes the user interface so much easier than going right into JavaScript. Even in 8th grade, when we are going into JavaScript, it's still the block coding, so they don't actually have to key in the exact instructions, but the JavaScript is on the code itself, block. So, and using a variety of resources like some videos, direct instruction, trial and error, students this year in 7th grade have been widely successful.
Oh, all right. Very good. Thank you.
Dr. Munson.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on Dr. Levinson's question, so is there some evidence that all of our students already know how to touch type that leads to phasing that out? Or is there some evidence that these new things that we're going to be doing are more important to success than being able to touch type?
When I came into the job in November, the curriculum for 6 and 7 had already been revised, and I can just speak to this on a bigger picture. We are recognizing right now that with a lot of our curriculum for middle school and for high school, we do need to take a look at where certain skills are happening with technology uses across the board, K through 12. So that is something that we do need as a district to follow up on, like where exactly are the kids learning to type in the keyboard, for instance. So that is something we're going to have to follow up on. The feeling right now is that the kids are coming into the middle school with that skill. That's the way that we, when the curriculum was written, it was based upon that understanding. The kids already had that skill coming in.
Okay, and so, I mean, I guess, it seems to me that's something you'd want to know before you revise the curriculum, but rather than following up on it. But it sounds like at the same time you already have at least an anecdotal sense that.
Yeah, I would agree that we do have a sense that it is happening.
I mean, that actually leads me to another question I had about the staging of this. I mean, I know my own daughter almost 10 years ago was working pretty regularly in the classroom on things like Google Docs and Google Slides in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Do we have evidence that students don't know how to do these things in middle school, and therefore we should be spending instructional time on it?
So when I just mentioned that I think we should look at, as a district, K through 12, where certain skills are happening along the way, I think it speaks to your point that we should look to see where exactly it's happening. With these courses, these are, exploratory, they're trimester, so we're talking about 12 weeks long where they're going to have this. So when you break down the courses, there's a lot of different topics and different units within these courses, and they're not going to be that extensively long. So, it works both ways. Unfortunately, we're not going to have a whole lot of time to go into. It's not like we're talking 12 weeks on Google Slides, where they already learned that in 3rd grade. So it's going to be for the Google Sites, for instance. They might have prior experience with that, but now it's under a different context of using it to create a career portfolio. So it's not an extensive amount of time, but we do feel like it's necessary at the middle school level.
So the keyboarding issue also brings up actually what was one of my more general questions, which is that I'm always impressed with the presentation of these, of what we're gonna enrich the students with in the district, and I'm grateful that we have the resources and the expertise to do this. But I'm always concerned about what we're getting rid of, right? Like there's like the number of hours in a school day is a zero-sum game, right? It's finite. So there's nothing on this list that we can address to students without eliminating something that they were doing beforehand. So what are the things that students are doing in computers and business applications now besides keyboarding that we're no longer going to be doing?
Sure. So 6th grade, traditionally, we did have the keyboarding element. 7th grade, traditionally, we had Microsoft Office, which was Word and Excel. 8th grade, we're just maneuvering some items, but the topics are still going to be the same plus adding to. So just in 6th and 7th grade are the areas that we are losing a little bit of content.
Okay. What is the... I think it's great that we're doing career awareness. It's not, the word natural was used. It's not clear to me why career awareness is naturally connected to computers. Like, why not do this in social science or language arts or math? Like, what's the natural fit?
Our department is computer and business applications, so we kind of look at the areas of computers and business, and traditionally the work standards fell under our department going back years ago.
Okay, so, but does the career awareness only address careers in business, or are there?
Not at all.
Okay. The other question, I was interested in the, so the websites that they're going to build, are those internal or are they public facing?
They stay internal. And the Google Sites do not work well on iPads, so students coming to 6th grade really has not had any experience in the Google Sites platform.
And is that related then to the portfolio? You have this idea that they'll be building this portfolio.
Correct. So the website that we start in 6th grade that they carry through 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade is focused on the career awareness and career building, among some other activities that we do inside the portfolio.
Great, thank you very much.
Mr. Champagne?
I just want to make sure following up on the questions my two colleagues had. So every student in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade is going to be exposed to this, is that correct?
That is correct.
And in doing so, how are this curriculum, for kids that are interested in this pathway or are uncertain, as they go into high school, is this curriculum dovetailing to what they will be exposed to in high school, so there's a natural progression, or is this unrelated to a lot of the things in the courses that are offered at the high school?
So there are a few courses in the math and computer science department that will handle the curriculum for computer programming languages.
Okay, so that's different from what this activity is.
It's a preliminary. It's the primary step before you move into full-fledged computer language.
But am I understanding you correctly that you said there's in the math area, so independent of what you're proposing here, there's programming opportunities already for these 6th, 7th, and 8th graders? Is that, or am I?
Going into high school?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that's in addition to what's...
Yeah, there are opportunities already at the high school level for kids to follow if they have interest in...
I'm talking about the middle school level. That's what I thought he was referring to.
Okay, so prior to next year, we have not had the exposure, the introduction to computer programming and coding at the middle level. And I think it shows, to be honest with you, with our numbers at the high school level who are interested in computer science. So I think this curriculum is one step in the right direction, and then we look to make some changes next year, and then after that, with giving our students more opportunities to follow their interest, if that's what they want to do. We just want to give the kids an exposure to the computer science, the physical component at the middle level. Maybe they want to get more interested in
So this is their first exposure to this level of kind of...
To this level, correct. Okay. Some teachers are starting to do some very basic things at the elementary level too, but this will be the first time they'll universally be exposed to it.
Very good.
Are there any other questions? I just have two quick, a question and or two comments, actually. My daughter was one of the students that didn't discover computer programming until late in her high school career, and she really enjoyed it, so I applaud the effort to get some exposure earlier, because I think there are a lot of people that will have some interest in it, and if they didn't know it beforehand, it's an opportunity to find out that interest earlier. I'd also like to say, ask a question about, did we have financial literacy before this, or how is that changed?
We began financial literacy a few years ago, but it was nothing in the curriculum. It was more activities that we did with the students when we were using like Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word. So they were activities that went along with what we were teaching.
Okay, I'm happy to see financial literacy in the curriculum. I think that's needed in communities. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. And so moving on, we have a presentation of an update on the 2019-20 proposed final budget by Bob Saul.
There we go. Right, so I'll make a brief update regarding the status of the proposed 2019-2020 budget and review the changes that have occurred since we reviewed this at the meeting in April. So I'll start with the document titled 2019-2020 Proposed Final Budget. It's on the screen. Certainly you can find it as well on your Chromebooks. On page 2 of that document, it highlights the key points. I think probably the most important key point at this juncture is the tax increase, which has gone from a 0.92% increase to a 0.42% increase. And I'll explain how that came to be in just a minute. Certainly you can see the other items that are there with regard to the key points. In the same document, I'd like to move to the back on page 35. 35 details the changes that were made, and I think we can go through these. There are relatively few, so we'll go through them item by item and explain those changes. So with regard to the current year budget, the current fiscal year, we took another look at the current status, where we are, and projecting where we're going to end the year. In doing that, you can see on page 35, under the 5/10/2019, which actually should be 5/13, we would use today's date in there. The first thing is local revenue, an increase of $88,000. I can tell you that most of that is related to local grants that we've received, which is roughly $74,000. We'll talk about expenditure related to that in just a minute, but most of these grants are at the elementary school level. Traditionally, grants such as East Penn School District Foundation grants, giant food market grants, Target grants, funding that's provided from Christmas City for photos, like spring photo, fun photos that come back to the schools. For many years, that was funneled through the elementary student activity funds. And we're actually working on sunsetting those activity funds for many reasons. They've come up in the past with the auditors in terms of how the students interact with those funds, et cetera. So we're running those monies now through the general fund, and this is an attempt to start recognizing them. And we'll see that as well in next year's budget. So in terms of the local revenue, most of that was recognizing the grants. State revenue, slight decrease, that's related to the decrease of expenditures for salaries and benefits. So that's the reimbursement from the state. The next item, which is salaries, that represents actually a slight decrease, a slight reduction in salaries for the current year, and then a reduction in benefits. Remember, benefits can be retirement, Social Security, as well as healthcare benefits. The next line item is district-wide instructional expenses. Again, there are those expenditures related to those local grants. And then finally, district-wide non-instructional. And again, it's just taking a hard look at the current year and where we're going to end the year. So in total, you can see it's about an additional $106,000 that will contribute to the fund balance and increase the fund balance. I guess I'll ask any questions on the current year.
Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, two things that you've just said sort of struck me. The first one was the part about the local grants. Now, these are one-time funds that we get. We may get them several years in a row, but they're not guaranteed to be there every year. And you're putting them in as revenue for the operations of the district. And I'm trying to understand how we can commingle one-time funds with revenue streams and why we would want to do that.
And speaking to just the current year, and maybe we can hold that thought in terms of next year until we get to next year, but in terms of the current year, these are revenues that we have already recognized. So we're already receiving those and we're recognizing the expenditure. So we're matching those up in the current year. So we're recognizing what's coming in and recognizing what's going out. So it's not really contributing to the operating fund of the district, if you will.
Okay.
This is fund balance, starting fund balance.
Just adding to the fund balance, in other words.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And so I'll address that again when we get to the budget for next year to answer that.
Okay, but you also said that you were, in this amount, you were running the student activity funds through the general fund.
No.
No.
If that's the way it came across, that is not what we're doing. What was formerly the elementary student activity funds, which really was more like a principal's account, where monies would go in and then it was used for building, to enhance the learning experience in the building for expenditures that directly benefited students. So certainly recognize the intent of student activity funds, but they weren't structured in a way that there were student officers that oversaw the funds with the advisors. And certainly at the elementary level, you could recognize why that wasn't occurring. And again, in an effort to sort of clean that up, we're now running those monies as grants and contributions through the general fund, the activity of the general fund.
Well, that's what I don't understand. I ran into a problem with this at the IU, and there was some legal issues associated with the concept that student activity funds are ones that are raised by students and deposited with the school district for the use by the student organizations that have contributed the funds. They are not funds that are part of the school district's funds that can be allocated simply by the school district or the IU to do something. There was some confusion about that, and I want to make sure the principal's funds, we allocate a certain amount of money to each principal for each school to have certain funds to do things. That's our budget. That's our funds. We can declare how they are used. But student activity funds, I believe as defined in the school code, are something entirely different, and I want to make sure that we are not commingling those.
I think that's the point of the change, is to not commingle these funds, these grants, with student activities money.
Principals' funds have never been commingled, as far as I know, with student activity funds. If somebody holds a cookie sale at Ayer Middle School, that money was supposed to be held separately so that it wasn't part of anybody's budget, and that was the clubs to disperse as they saw fit.
That's correct. If you look at the source of these receipts, they are not from student activities. They are not student-generated. They're monies given, for instance, as I said, the East Penn School District Foundation awards a grant to a teacher. Giant supermarkets will give monies to a building to use for expenditures on students.
I understand those sources. That's not the problem. Calling them student activity funds is.
And that's
exactly,
and that is why we're changing it. And that's why we're making the change, Mr. Ballard.
Because you called them that in the past? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And that's
now they're
correcting.
going into the general fund and not into the student activity fund.
Yeah, so as long as we keep the student activity funds separate from those funds you talk, but we shouldn't call them student activity funds.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yes, we have had extensive conversations with the auditors regarding how to do this appropriately in terms of recording the revenues and the expenditures in the general fund so that we can still set those monies, quote, set those monies aside to be used by the buildings and to be carried forward from year to year. So if they receive, we'll say, a nice $5,000 grant from Burlington Coat Factories, I think we had a building that received that this year. So if they spent $2,500 this year, we certainly want to recognize that they have $2,500 remaining next year. So we've worked out a way to do that. But again, this is recognizing the receipts in the general fund because that's where they will now be deposited.
Okay, and they are not student activity funds.
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions at this point? Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Moving then to page 36, which is the 2019-2020 budget. Looking at the revenues, first, we had growth in real estate assessment, so that is tax-based growth, which equaled $326,000. As I mentioned earlier, there was a reduction in the tax rate. That reduction in tax rate was a reduction of revenue of $492,000. The state property reduction allocation is the money that's received from the gaming fund, the state gaming fund that is used for the homestead reduction on each qualifying individual's homestead. The allocation was released by the state, so this adjusts that to the actual allocation we'll be receiving from the Commonwealth. The contributions and donations from private sources is exactly what we were just discussing. It's a $100,000 line item of revenues to recognize those grant funds that will be received. Jumping ahead for just a minute, if you look at the expenditures, you see an equal $100,000 expenditure. So in terms of budget, you have a revenue and an expenditure that really cancel each other out in terms of contributing to your operating budget. So if, for instance, if we made the revenue $150,000 and the expenditure $100,000, it would look like we were supplementing the general operating budget by $50,000. By making those the same amount, they offset each other. but at least it recognizes that there will be revenue from those private sources and grants and contributions, and there will be expenditures related to that. The final two items are Social Security and retirement reimbursement from the Commonwealth. Again, that's related to the reduction in salaries that we'll see in just a minute. If you look at under the expenditure area, under 513, you see salary adjustments. At the time that this was completed, there were 7 teacher retirements that had been submitted. At this point, there are 8. What I will tell you is the 8th one is an ESL teacher, and more than likely, as we replace that, it will be replaced at a level similar to the person who is retiring. So the impact of the one that's not included in this budget is relatively small. Certainly, we will make an adjustment for that before we bring it back in June, but just in terms of an understanding of the impact of the one that's missing, I don't believe it's going to be overly significant. The benefit adjustments, you see a decrease in benefits, again related to the reduction in salaries. Tuition from private residential student placements. As we look to put communities and schools in here as a line item expenditure, we looked at the special education department budget to see if there was anywhere that we could trim the budget a little bit to help offset the cost of communities and schools. This was an area where, after a hard look, I believe there's a student that will no longer be in a placement, so that was an area for reduction. We talked about the contribution, communities and schools, the $96,000 that was reviewed at the last board meeting has been included in this budget. Federally funded professional development. As we get to this point in the year, we start to tweak the budget for the federal programs. So we record the current amount that we receive for federal programs, but as we look at the expenditure budget, we have to start to make that match, and we have to start to align the expenditures with how we believe they'll be spent next year. And so some of that is used for professional development, so that's recognizing that federal expenditure. And then the final item is we have seen a small uptick in school board conference and travel, so this is just a slight adjustment to certainly recognize those additional expenditures. So overall, if you take the additional revenues and the additional expenditures and net those out, that's where we come up with the reduction in the tax rate. Can I answer questions regarding this page and the adjustments that have been made?
Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, 2 questions. First, just so I understand the magnitude of the tax increase that's remaining in the budget, what dollar figure approximately would be required to reduce that to 0?
Roughly, we'll say roughly $400,000.
$400,000?
Yeah, 0.1% is roughly $100,000.
Now, elsewhere, there's discussion of a increase in the amount for communities and schools of $288,000, I believe it is.
It's over 3 years.
Well, didn't say over 3 years in the material I looked at, so we'll just say that there. Where is that in this budget?
So the $96,000 for year 1 is recorded in the 2019-20 budget, and then if you want to see the remainder, that would be in the long-range plan. It is built in then to the future years as expenditures in the future years.
So that the $96,000 you're showing here is the contribution for middle school costs in 1920?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Ms. Bowman?
This might come up later, but so for this communities and schools, there was a grant opportunity, and can you tell me how that's reflected here?
Right, so it was my understanding that we would only be required to pay 60%, and the other 40% would be paid directly by communities and schools. So the $96,000 is the net that we would pay.
Okay.
If it had been structured differently and we had received $40,000 and we'd pay 100%, I certainly would have structured that differently in the budget.
What would 100% have been? I guess that's the number that I'm missing. The total cost of communities and schools.
About 160.
Like what will this go up to eventually when the grant runs out?
I think it was about 140, wasn't it? Yeah, it's 160.
Yeah,
About 160.
It's gonna,
roughly.
it's gonna a little less than double.
Thank you to whoever helped, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
We might be wrong, but.
Any other
Actually,
questions?
along those lines, the net effect in the first year, because we're going to be saving some, or maybe I should ask, is the savings in the special education budget related to the presence of the other staff from community schools?
The answer is no.
No. Okay, so that's a savings, and this is
separate from.
Separate. Okay.
Correct.
Any other questions? Mr. Champagne.
Just following up on Mr. Bauer's question, if you were to reduce the tax rate to zero, what programs or what issues would be impacted? I said if you were to reduce the tax rate to zero, what programs potentially could be impacted by that? I'm just curious.
We have not had those discussions internally, so I can't comment without having the discussions.
Okay. Is that something that we should have?
Well, maybe another way of saying it is, we don't know which specific items, but we have a list of district priorities that originally were being paid for by the non-zero tax increase.
Right.
And so it would be from that list of district priorities, I'm assuming. Is that a valid assumption?
It certainly would be a natural starting place.
Yeah, I think we'd have to look at those priorities that we've presented over the course of several months to the board and the community. That would be a starting point.
Okay. I just was curious. I'm not suggesting a change, but I just would like to understand where you would go with that. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Sure. Actually, I would like to review just briefly, because there is a new, I'd like to briefly review a new page that's in the long-range plan, if I may.
He lives for this stuff.
Can figure out how to do this. There we go. This is on page 26 of the long-range plan, there is a chart that's been added, and this is a follow-up to discussions we had at a previous meeting. And this is an evaluation of both the combined fund balance, which means combined fund balance would be the general fund balance and the capital reserve fund balance, as well as capital reserve contribution targets. And the metrics for this came as a result of polling school districts across the Commonwealth to see what metrics they use in terms of adequate funding levels for capital reserve funds. So what this, the first calculation does is looks at 2 months of general fund expenditures, which tends to be a standard both by the Government Finance Officers Association. We also see that from Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and a number of other organizations generally recommend 2 to 2.5 months of operating expenses in reserve. So it calculates the 2 months, then it combines the general fund and capital reserve fund balances. We have generally in the past tried to keep our general fund under 10 to 15, in the 10 to 15% range and not let that grow. So by combining these, it allows us to start to evaluate where it is in terms of a standard that's out there. It certainly doesn't suggest that we need to meet that standard. If that is the desire of the board, it's certainly something we would work toward long-term. But I think what it allows the board to do is have a benchmark and look at the long-term change of that number. Is it going up? Is it going down? Or is it remaining steady? So it allows a benchmark in terms of overall district reserves. The second one evaluates the annual contribution to the capital reserve fund. And what this does is it looks at 2% of our property insurance appraisal value and calculates the 2% and then compares that to our contribution to capital reserve. And essentially, 2% would be funding depreciation if you figured a 50-year life on a physical asset. You're essentially funding the depreciation value annually to continue to put back into your facilities or set aside for future facility renovations. So again, it sets a benchmark that you can evaluate where we are and where we're going. And actually, in terms of this metric, if you look at the future and the contribution that had already been mapped out, we actually work toward a point where we meet that target. So anyway, this, again, just additional information for the long-range plan, another set of metrics to look at a different piece of the financial picture. Any questions I can answer on that?
Mr. Ballard.
Can you justify the use of a 50-year lifetime for buildings because the average building has to be refurbished every 25 to 30 years?
It's a great question, and as we've talked about in the past, the old standard was remodeling every 20 years, refurbishing. It certainly is debatable in any direction. This is what another relatively large suburban Philadelphia school district used. When I plugged it in and looked at it, it actually it sort of matches up with the targets that we had set. You certainly could use 4%, which would, bring that down to 25-year depreciation. So the answer is, it's really up for debate. At least this is some standard that allows you to benchmark from year to year and remains consistent from year to year in terms of the calculation.
Yeah, well, it's nice that it meets up with our plan, but if our plan is deficient, that doesn't mean that it's a good progression. I'm trying to understand it because if we don't put money into capital reserve to refurbish the buildings, then we have to borrow money at the end of every 25 years to refurbish the buildings anyway. So it's a question of, this is along the lines of we don't refurbish our buildings and we just try to keep them maintained over the course of 50 years and not a replacement value or an updating or anything like that value that's in here. So I think 2% is low, very low. And especially with the way technology and instructional strategies and things like that are changing, saying that we're going to go for 50 years before we have to worry about replacing or refurbishing a building is not supportable, I think, by past examples. And you look at the life of inherent systems in the buildings, and your plumbing is not going to last 50 years in many buildings. Your heating system is going to have to be replaced. Certainly your roof is going to have to be replaced. So the number you're putting in here at 2% is like, well, we'll put this in and sort of replace the building at the end, I guess, type of money, and that just doesn't work out. Do you have a rebuttal to that? I mean,
no, actually, my rebuttal is this. You probably won't find a person in my position who wouldn't want to put more money into this. So I'm standing here agreeing with you, but it really comes down to striking a balance, and it's a very delicate balance, but striking a balance between the amount that you're able to contribute, the amount that you're using for funding education, the amount that the taxpayers are able to support. I mean, there's a delicate balance there. Certainly, we could set the target higher and over a longer term aim for that higher target. But overall, I agree that more is always better than less.
Well, I know the struggles. I grew up in a district and went to school in a district that had a pay-as-you-go philosophy, which is essentially put away enough money till you get to the point where you have to build a new school or replace a new school or replace or refurbish a school, and you have the money in your bank account, which nobody really likes because they see that money out there and think that it's, been robbed from the taxpayers or whatever. And you would be looking at more than a few buckets in Emmaus High School by the end of the 50 years, trying to, go at this rate. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is we have to understand that if we don't put money away and save it up to do this, then we have to pay for it in interest rates on bonds when we finally have to go do it and have to borrow $25 million. So just as long as that's understood in this model.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, I guess Chuck, maybe it's just off the same concern, but in a different way. I mean, if you think about the $5 million that he's, is a target, we're not even accruing that much on our capital list. I mean, our capital refurbishment projects are significantly lower than this $5 million target. So, I guess what I'm taking away from it is we're able to maintain the buildings in good working order for much less than this $5 million. I mean, if you look at what's in that list, I mean, you're replacing roofs, you're replacing other equipment as necessary, so either we're doing a fabulous job in maintaining our facilities, and we're getting the 50-year life, or longer, or we're going to be stuck with a real big bill at some point, and we just don't know it yet. I don't know what it is, but my sense is we're doing the appropriate things that we need to do to maintain the facilities and not run up against a big problem in the future. So, while it's a nice target to have, I'm more concerned about is the list of things that we are saying we need to do reflective of what really needs to be do to maintain the buildings versus this hypothetical target. And I'm assuming that what we're projecting in this plan are the things that really make the difference to keep the facilities in good working order. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yes, that's a fair statement. I think I would remind the board, though, of the process that we have recommended in terms of looking at a demographic survey, conducting a demographic survey, conducting a feasibility, then the following year, conducting a feasibility study. And I would refer you back to page 21 in terms of our infrastructure and the current age of the infrastructure. And so we're coming off of several years where our infrastructure had just been renovated, or some buildings were relatively new. And again, as they age, I think that list that you've referred to becomes more comprehensive, and you see a greater expense on that. I agree with you. If you look at the near term, you're certainly not seeing that. But there will be a time, I think, where those expenses will become a little greater.
Any other comments? I have a couple comments. I think having this information, having a benchmark is a positive step, and I don't know what the right number is, but I think having the information in there and then looking at some of the information. For example, you have in that chart you mentioned the last refurbishments, I see 2005 and 2007 and 2004, and maybe we can look back at the history of some of our history to try to understand, one, timing of when we need to make refurbishments, and two, how the cost. I don't really have a sense what the cost of a refurbishment is relative to the price of the building. If it's half the price of the building, then maybe the 2% is the right number for a 25-year refurbishment cycle, but I don't really have that. And maybe looking back at some of our recent history will be helpful in that. Thanks.
And I would just remind, this is a living, breathing document, which we certainly tweak as time progresses. So if we see, or we have discussions surrounding this, and we feel that, it should be 1.5% or 4%, or certainly we could change it as time marches forward. At least we've established some sort of measurement and benchmark.
And we start thinking about it as part of our plan going forward.
Correct.
That's important. Mr. Ballard.
I just want to point out, 1989 is the year you're looking for. Macungie Elementary School is the oldest unrefurbished building in the district.
Yeah, I was looking at refurbishments we have made on schools recently and what our experience was, what drove us to need that, how much did we spend.
Point out that 11 and 19 is 30 years.
I wasn't saying it with regard to that. You had mentioned a 25-year lifetime, and so that was what I was referring to in my 25 years. I was just recommended we look back at recent history to try to ascertain what is a reasonable number, because I am admitting I don't really have a sense myself what the appropriate number is, but perhaps using some history would help.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this information this evening.
Okay. We have light. Moving on to the report of Superintendent of Schools. Ms. Campbell.
Thank you. I wanted to provide a brief update on our task force that's been investigating secondary school start times. We've met twice since our last board meeting to begin investigating the topic of start times at the secondary level. And so far, our work has included learning more about adolescent sleep health, and we had Dr. Erica Bagley from Muhlenberg University who shared with us research on adolescent sleep. We, as a committee, have then begun to dive into the research on the impact of adjusting school start times. And then we've also recently begun to investigate the process followed by some neighboring school districts, particularly in Delaware County, as we look to Radnor Township, Unionville, Chadds Ford, and Tredyffrin Easttown, who've recently actually have made some changes to their start times for the upcoming school year. So it's really about looking at the process that they followed, not so much the intended outcome or what the outcome actually was. And just today, several members of our task force had an opportunity to attend an event in Radnor where some of those school districts that I just mentioned were able to talk a little bit about the process that they followed, and certainly highlighted the importance of community involvement, transparency, and to speak more about both of those points, they talked about some specific strategies that they have found very helpful in their process, including some community forums at which time the community had an opportunity to share their perspectives on the work that was happening. Our task force certainly values community input to the process, and we are working on a plan to administer a survey to parents, teachers, and students regarding adolescent sleep health and their perceptions about the impact of adjusting secondary start times. We're hoping to have the survey administered this spring so that ultimately the feedback that we get from those surveys can help us to further plan our work as we move forward. I also have quite a few congratulations to mention. In particular, first, several of our Emmaus High School students who attend LCTI participated in the FCCLA State Leadership Conference, which stands for Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America. In particular, we had Michaela Braylon, who earned a gold medal in restaurant service, Gabrielle Howarth, who earned a silver medal in food innovations, and Kaylee Jones earned a silver medal in food art. And Gabrielle, for her accomplishments, has also qualified to compete this summer in the FCCLA National Leadership Conference in California. So that's a great opportunity. Also recognizing our Emmaus High School students, we had 20 students from EHS who attained national recognition for their performance in the 2018-19 National Spanish exams. These exams are the largest of their kind in the U.S., with over 146,000 students who have participated in 2019. Speaking of accomplishments, we have several students who were recognized for their involvement in the PMEA Region Orchestra Festival, specifically Sejan Patel, who was with us earlier, Adriana Tomasello, Nick Cannon, and Nat Wertz. In particular, Adriana and Nick participated in the All-State Band and Orchestra Festival that was held just the first weekend in April. Recently, we had 55 Emmaus High School student athletes who formally announced their college commitments. That happened on May 2nd at Emmaus High School at our Student Athlete Announcement Day. And we had, again, over 55 students. The event was a little bit different this year, so I would like to recognize Becky George and our athletic department, as well as the high school administration, for really trying a new way in which those signings occurred. And so we had student athletes from volleyball, lacrosse, cross country, baseball, basketball, swimming, wrestling, softball, football, tennis, soccer, and field hockey, who all officially announced their commitments to various colleges and universities. Speaking of colleges and universities and post-graduation plans, on May 10th, the Skills USA Council celebrated the signing day for students who attend career and technical schools in District 11. And so the schools that participated in this signing event were the Career Institute of Technology, our own Lehigh Career and Technical School, LCTI, Monroe Career and Technical School, Upper Bucks County Technical School, and Bethlehem Area Vocational Technical School. And we had 6 EHS students who attend LCTI who were able to sign on to either higher education and/or were hired by to join the workforce. So that was a great accomplishment, again, for more EHS students. If you've not yet seen it, I encourage you to stop by what was formerly Howarders Furniture on 5th Street in Emmaus. And several students, as part of our EHS art program, actually are, I believe they're near finished, but they're painting a large mural on the side of that building that is absolutely phenomenal. So stop by and enjoy the student artwork. As I think it was Sydney who mentioned earlier tonight, on May 3rd, we had our senior picnic, followed by the senior prom that evening, and then the after ball party, which was held from 11:30 until I think about 4 a.m. Again, I cannot thank enough the faculty, staff, and the volunteers who gave an incredible effort to be sure that our seniors, as well as their guests, were safe and engaged in some really cool activities for that entire evening into the wee hours of the morning. I had the opportunity to stop by. I did not last till 4 a.m., believe me, and was really just so incredibly impressed with the activities. There was mini golf, students were able to swim safely in the pool, rooms set up all over almost the entire first floor of the high school. Emmaus High School student Nate Garcia was named as a 2019 Scholastic Art and Writing Award winner for his art piece named Trojan Cow. So now Nate, his family, and his EHS art teacher, Tracy Maley, are headed to Carnegie Hall in New York City to receive his award in June. I also, as was recognized earlier tonight by our students, again, just wanted to congratulate and thank our high school guidance department, and Jen Carolla, the department chair, who's with us tonight, for making the 7th annual college fair a huge success. I know we had some board members who were able to join us. Many community members literally had our 2 gymnasiums packed with well over 100 representatives. So just a great community effort. And then finally, as Mr. Smith alluded to earlier, we tried something new this spring on May 8th. Members of, I have a senior citizen advisory council that I meet with about quarterly to talk about a variety of topics related to teaching and learning here in East Penn. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to, rather just sitting in a conference room and talking about what teaching and learning looks like here in East Penn, to invite members of our Senior Citizen Advisory Council to actually go out into buildings and experience teaching and learning. So we had our inaugural, we termed it the Learning Express. A big thank you to STA for providing the transportation for us. We had a group of about 15 individuals who joined us. They were greeted by some members of the high school band as they boarded the bus. And we it was a busy morning. We toured Wescosville Elementary, Eyre Middle School, and Emmaus High School, and really saw just a gamut of fantastic teaching and learning opportunities throughout the district. We really hope to continue the event in the future, and I couldn't end without giving a special thank you to Laura Grow. It was one of those events that, like, she and I talked about it a couple months ago, and to see it come to fruition was really well beyond expectations. So thank you to Laura, as well as all the building leaders in those buildings who helped to make that day a great success.
Are there any questions? Mr. Smith?
I just wanted to comment on how impressed I have been really over the last month, the level of effort on the part of the administration to reach out to the community to share the amazing things that are going on in our school. From the Learning Express was just a fantastic opportunity, and shocked that more people more districts don't do that kind of an opportunity, and I hope it continues. But I also wanted to, in that same vein, commend our social media department for the focus that has been placed on taking what we do and bringing it out to the community. I was particularly impressed with the focus on some of our graduating seniors, which is just so professionally done and so, I'm sure, meaningful and rewarding to those kids, but really gives a sense of just what it means to be an East Penn graduate. And I can't say enough about the difference in what our social media and our communication and our connection to communities, the difference from where we are now, from where we were a year ago is huge. And big round of applause on my part for everybody that's involved with that. So thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Thank you. Okay, moving on to personnel items. I have a comment that there's a correction to item 17, summer technology programs. The appointment of Aidan Levinson is being withdrawn per policy 304, employment of district staff.
You missed the person.
Hold on. We're on 4A.
Yeah, the personnel section. You jumped to the business.
No, that's personnel items.
Is personnel. XVII.
Oh, okay, I see, yep,
Yes.
yep.
I don't.
Used. See, I didn't know, I got confused.
Oh.
Personnel agenda items, the first exhibit.
Oh, I see.
I didn't do the Roman numeral, I translated into Arabic.
I wasn't even to the right I wasn't to the right document.
So item XVII
Yeah, thanks.
is being amended. Okay, with the amendment, may I have a motion for personnel items?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Bowman?
I just wanted to mention one of the retirements, Mrs. Hirsch was a wonderful second grade teacher to my son. My favorite memory of her is just one of those memories that shows how so many of our teachers go above and beyond. I showed up to chaperone a school trip, and I came with extra food just in case some child didn't remember to bring their lunch. And Mrs. Hirsch says, "Oh, I always have extra food," and she had this whole container of sandwiches. So I was sad to see she was retiring, but of course understand that people move on in life, so I just wanted to mention that.
Are there any other comments? I'd also like to note, Mr. Damian, my daughter had a chance to, he ran the musicals at Eyre, and my daughter had a chance to do a couple of musicals and really enjoyed the opportunity, and that really enriched her middle school experience. So I'd like to express my appreciation for Mr. Damian's service to the district as well. Any other comments? Did we already take, no, we didn't take one. Ms. Allen, will you call a roll, please?
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to business operations. If there are no objections, I'd like to take all the items but F contracts and the bid opening report J, which is for information, together as one item.
So all but F, but J, F and J?
All but F and J.
I'd like to hear about item O too as well.
Okay, all but F, J, and O.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on those items?
I had a quick
Dr.
question.
Levinson?
Yeah, I had a quick question about items M and N.
Okay.
How does the district participate in these particular arrangements?
Yes, M and N are two items. One is authorization to participate with the Department of General Services contracts that they issue, and N is authorization to participate in joint purchasing with a number of joint purchasing entities that exist both within our intermediate unit, so in the county, state, and at a national level. We use these, the first one, the general services, we tend not to use as frequently, but the other ones, the joint purchasing, we use them actually relatively frequently for a variety of items. These are arrangements where items have been bid by these organizations, and so we then can piggyback on those bids that have been completed. So it's an opportunity to get, quote, best price bid items, but without actually doing the work for ourselves.
What would be some examples of the
it could be anything from cafeteria equipment, it could be vehicles, it could be office supplies, et cetera.
Mr. Ballard?
There are a couple of things that I've tried to explain this. The state negotiates contracts for certain large items such through the General Services Administration, such as turf fields, the materials to replace turf fields, or automobiles or vehicles under lease or purchase. It also has large supplies of things like salt for de-icing roads and a whole lot of other things. And the idea is they go out for bid for a large amount of this stuff, and then individual school districts can go in and just not have to negotiate their price. They can just grab the state price and get the amount of stuff they need and continue on. And it's been a money saver for the state in general for years, because they can aggregate all the districts and also the state purchases and say, you know, if you want our 200-ton salt order, you give us the best price. And a similar thing through, it's like the insurance consortium for healthcare. We go through a grouping of IUs and school districts and commonly bid items like paper and toilet paper and other things that we use on a regular basis and get the best price for the consortium, and then we just go out and say, send a purchase order to the consortium bidder and say, send us 12 cases of toilet paper, and we get it at the best price. So it's an arrangement to try to get the best price as we can in the marketplace.
Saves on both the pricing and the expense of bidding.
Yeah. Right, correct.
I think the other thing that's important to recognize is that when something is put out for bid, the law requires us to accept the lowest responsible bidder. And responsible is very difficult to prove that somebody is not responsible. So if we have, for instance, a system installed in our building, which is maybe simplex elevator, and we need something that would be an attachment or go along with that, potentially if we bid, we could end up with a, pick XYZ brand device that's now working with our simplex, where these pre-bid contracts, typically, we could go find simplex on there, and so we're able to also procure equipment that will
minimal quality.
that is OEM with what we have in our buildings already. And sometimes that's desirable to have, standard equipment across your district. So that's another very important time that we'll use those types of contracts.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Next up, under item F, contracts. Is there any opposition to taking all the contracts other than the communities and schools contracts together? May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Dr. Munson?
Yeah, I had a question about, well, first, the Bancroft tuition contract. What is the services that this private school are providing that we can't provide in the district?
I have some information, and Dr. Bacharach, please feel free to fill in any gaps if I leave anything out. This particular contract is for a residential treatment facility in New Jersey as a result of the fact that we had a student who recently moved to the district and had been placed in that school or in that facility in his previous school. And so the expectation is that since the parents are now residents of the East Penn School District, we're responsible for continuing and paying for the child's educational program. And then when the child is released from that facility, certainly then we would look at the best program for that student, potentially more local.
What's the remainder of the year?
Yes, it's a remainder of the year.
Okay, and so this contract arises not necessarily from our inability to provide the services the student needs, but a legal mandate that requires us to continue the private school education because of the residency of the parents?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that might then answer my other question, which is that I didn't understand why that contract looked so different from the Hogan Learning Academy one, which seems to be an open-ended one. What services is Hogan Learning Academy providing that we can't provide in the district?
Hogan is actually, this particular contract is for 2 students for extended school year or ESY services, which would begin July 1st. And you see the total there. For the total ESY program for both students, the approximate cost would be $19,000.
And I guess I don't know what ESY means. I mean, we
extended school year. So for some of our special education students, and there is a process that the IEP team goes through to determine if a child is eligible for extended school year services. And if indeed they are, the district is obligated to provide those educational services throughout the summer, in essence. So this, Hogan is for 2 students for their ESY program because their needs are so significant that we're not able to accommodate them. You might recall we do offer extended school year or ESY services for many of our special education students here in district.
I guess that was my question. I mean, to say that they're providing ESY services doesn't really get to my question, because I guess what's the distinction between the services they provide and the services that we provide in-house?
It ultimately would be the level of need of the student, so their learning needs are so significant that we're not able to meet their needs to provide those services here for them as part of our district ESY program.
Thank you.
Over the summer.
Correct.
So did the 2 students take advantage of our programs during this regular school year, and then this Hogan is just supplementing? Is that works, or?
We'll have to find out about their, I have a feeling they're probably not with us during the school year as well.
Okay, all right, okay.
That is correct. If you recall, probably a few months ago, there were 2 contracts on for Hogan Learning Academy for 2 students. And so they do attend that special school for autistic students. And so they're going to continue their ESY program for 5 weeks at that facility.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Champagne?
On the CLIU contracts, can someone just help me understand the pool of legal services consultation agreement, exactly what we're...
And just a moment, while we're on that subject, I forgot to mention there's a correction to the start date. It was
there's a
it was
typo.
listed as 2018 and it's 2019, July 1st, 2019.
What does that agreement do for us, or what do we get for that?
Yeah, it's thank you for asking the question. It's actually an agreement that, and many of the districts that are part of CLIU participate as part of the technology pool. So it is a pool, a legal counsel in essence, that has a specific expertise in educational technology. And what we get as part of that service is we have a small team of administrators, team members here from East Penn, who then participate as part of ongoing professional development with the Tech Council throughout the school year. So we actually travel to the IU and participate in those sessions. And I'll share that having attended some of the Tech Council, there's great value in the learning from not only the attorneys or the legal counsel, but also great learning from the other districts that participate as part of that Tech Council. So there's professional development as well as ongoing access to the council regarding any host of topics that might come up, whether we're looking at acceptable use policies, as we've looked at implementing a one-to-one program over the course of several years. The IU Tech Council has been very helpful to answer any sort of questions or give us guidance as we've proceeded.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Mr. Jankowski.
Is this a monthly rate? The fees, it's based on the number of entity participants. How is that determined?
It's for the year.
I think it's an annual fee.
Okay.
Depending on how many school districts participate, it's more or less a fixed price, and more school districts participate, we all get a lower price. Any other comments, questions? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. I now have a motion for communities and schools for the Byron Middle School and Laura McCungy Middle School. Excuse me.
Yeah, I was just going to ask they be separated.
Yeah.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Ballard.
Yes, I've stated before, I have certain reservations about the process here. First of all, I wanted to ask the solicitor, the paragraph 6 payment has the full $288,000 for services in there without any reference to the offer that has purportedly been made to the district, and I don't know if that's been made in writing, for a grant to cover part of those expenses. But there's no provision in here for tying our payments to that purported grant being given to us, and so this obligates us for $288,000 just on its face.
That's the 60% of 3 years.
Well,
it's $8,000 a month for 36 months. I mean, $96,000 a month. $8,000 a month for 36 months. Or $96,000 a year for 3 years.
Okay, well, that doesn't total $288,000 in services. What I'm saying is,
I think I calculated it, and I did. I'm sure I did it before, but I'll do it.
It states it in.
Yeah.
It is 96.
36 times 8,000 is 288,000.
so that's the number with the grant.
Yes. Spread out over 3 years. And I'm assuming it's I didn't ask, but I'm assuming it's a 3-year contract because of the grant that we're obligated as part of the grant to do 3 years rather than the high school one is only 1 year at a time.
Okay. So we're paying $96,000 for the first 3 years. And we don't, and how do we get out of this contract at the end of the 3 years?
We don't renew a contract?
It's a 3-year contract.
It does not extend beyond it does not extend, if you look at paragraph, trying to find the Roman, I know it's Roman numeral 9, but I'm just making sure it wasn't.
Is that 1X?
Yeah, find the right page here.
Either party may terminate at written notice.
Either party may, at any time, providing notice to the other party at least 60 calendar days prior to termination of the agreement. And the agreement in number 10 was that this continues to June 30, 2020.
Well, I have two basic concerns. The first one is that we have not yet had a full year of evaluation of the services from CIS. We're close, but we still haven't had the full year. And the numbers that we were given in a special report had to do with the number of students treated, but nothing that I could see was any effectiveness measure. Measuring the number of students that we've seen is one thing. Getting reports on what the effectiveness is, has this reduced disciplinary actions? Has this removed anyone or successfully treated anyone who was causing problems in classrooms from continuing to do so? Has this had impact other than visits and contacts? What I'm saying is, what is the effectiveness measure for this program before we expand it to other schools? I have not seen that. I've seen, like I said, statistics about how many people have been interacting based on some metric that somebody has referred them there, but I have not seen the effectiveness measures that I would have expected from such a program before we decided to expand it. That's the first problem I have. The second problem I have, again, is philosophical. This is not just a schools problem. It is a countywide problem, it's a statewide problem. But the only community, if you will, that's being asked to fund this effort is the East Penn School District taxpayers. There's no county contribution, there's no state contribution, there are no grants that we're applying for to pay for this from the state or the county. It is solely coming from East Penn taxpayers for a community mental health problem. If it is a community mental health problem, the community ought to be stepping up and helping to pay for it. And we earlier heard the commentator make a statement, it doesn't matter who should be responsible. Well, it does matter who should be responsible when we're arguing about what we can spend on educational programs because we're limited in the amount of taxes we can impose on the residents of our district. And then we're providing community mental health services, and that's what this is, in the school, and not defining to the taxpayers by these measures of effectiveness what we're getting for the money so far. So I am against expanding this program until we have some tangible results that we can show people that as far as our school organization is concerned, it has benefits to us because it does A, B, and C. Not that it feels good to be able to say we're contacting so many people. Contacting is not enough. Contacting has to be done with effective treatment that actually accomplishes the goal of the program. And what I have not seen is the argumentation that shows me that we have measures of effectiveness. So expanding the program with less than a year of operation without having measures of effectiveness and just saying we're going to throw it into Iyer and the other middle school does not seem to me to be reasonable at this stage. So I will oppose this contract. Thank you.
Any other comments? Dr. Levinson?
Yes, so Mr. Ballard makes some legitimate points, but I think the way that I'm looking at this is that I remember from the presentation, I felt like there were some points and metrics that were made, maybe not specific to the East Penn School District, but in general, on how it can and does work. I do think that the issues that are before us in the district, while they are certainly a community responsibility, I remember Mr. Flanders' point saying that, well, we still have to deal with the problems once they're in the school and try and address it in some meaningful way. The other aspect is that, these services are being offered to us on a contract with a grant. I don't recall what the grant was, who was funding the grant, but I suppose in a way you can look at that as the external community trying to foster the opportunity to bring this into the middle school. And then the other point I want to make is that I know from my own experience, you often bring in external people, contractors, consultants, what have you, to supplement what you're trying to do and perhaps even use it as an opportunity to learn more about, what to do in these instances. So I'm wondering, and I don't know if you can necessarily answer it at this point, is that after this 3-year contract, could we use this as an opportunity for our internal personnel to learn what it is the CIS does with these students and perhaps bring this expertise into the district, and either bring it in so that our existing people can be trained up on that and do that perhaps at a discount to what we're already paying for community and schools. So with that, I do think that this is an important thing to address with our youth, and I think it's an opportunity for the district to learn and perhaps incorporate the lessons so that maybe we don't necessarily have to use CIS in the future, and and maybe at the same time allow us to reduce the problems so that the overall financial burden is less. So with that, I'll be supporting the motion.
Any other comments? Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, Mr. Ballard does make some valid points, and I wish there was another way for the community to support, what is necessary to facilitate the best opportunity for the students of this district and deal with some of the unfortunate things that we're finding coming into the district and the cases that we're having to manage. I did feel that the CIS presentation did lay out. They've been in the high school for 1.5 years now. They were started in 17-18. They're now in their second full year. I felt that the metrics that they presented, while not maybe as useful and helpful as I would like to have seen them, they did seem to indicate that the direction of the program was in a positive way, and that the cases that were being addressed were cases that we could not facilitate without that support. I view this 3-year contract as a way to figure out whether or not in the long term we will have a number of years at the high school, we will have 3 years at the middle school, to really get a good sense and handle on, okay, is this working, or do we have to take another approach to deal with the problems? But I think it would be remiss upon us to not try to address some of these problems. We're not going to solve all of them, and I don't even expect, we're going to solve a majority of them, but at least we're giving the kids an opportunity to maybe be successful, and I think that's what we're all about. So I will be supporting this motion.
Ms. Bowman?
Our kids come from a community, and they're with us most of their day hours, and then they go back home to a community. And when they come to us, they come with whatever problems that they had. They don't leave them behind. And whether those problems are hunger or poverty or family issues, those things all continue to affect our students at school. And if our mission is to educate students, we have to educate the whole student. So I'm wholeheartedly behind doing what we need to do to help our students learn, whatever that may mean. And we're already doing some of those things. We have the dental screenings. We have, I believe, medical screenings in the schools. Our school guidance office already does counseling and has for as long as we've had a guidance. I don't go back that many years as some people, but I assume that's decades perhaps. Free lunch program. These are all things that you could say are community issues that we're handling in the schools, and we handle them in the schools because they affect learning, and mental health is something that also affects learning. One of the things I was looking forward to today that I didn't get was more information on the program, and I do feel that I'm at a loss. In that I don't feel like we have a mental health plan that's comprehensively addressing this problem. And I wonder a little if we have some loss aversion and we're, oh, there's a grant, we don't want to lose the grant, let's do it. It feels a little bit like we're being pressured to suddenly expand this program probably prematurely before the board would be ready to do that because the grant is ready. And that does give me pause, but at the same time, if we're choosing between this and nothing, obviously this is better. My question is this enough? And I would like, if we move forward with this, to continually study and continually ask critical questions of, is this really helping our students? How many students? Is it helping enough of our students? The students that it's helping, is it helping them to learn? Are there other ways to pay for it? For example, medical assistance. Are there ways to pull fundings through that to pay for counseling that lower income students get at school, or students who are already on medical assistance because of their different special needs? Maybe that can also offset the cost of this program. And that would be a way to spread around what Mr. Ballard talked about, so that it's not only local property tax dollars that are paying for this. Those are my thoughts.
Dr. Munson?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what some of my colleagues have said. I share Mr. Ballard's concern, which I actually think is a general concern in some of the data that we see, not just with CIS, but with a lot of things, that we get a lot of information about what people are doing, but not necessarily measures of the results that they're achieving by that doing. And I don't think anyone on this board doubts that people are very busy and are working hard. The question is whether or not that's the sort of, that we're getting a return on the investment. And so, so I think that is a real issue, but like Mr. Champagne, I think that we did see at least some larger statistics, not necessarily about our district, that shows that CIS has some of those metrics, and that we should be able to have those when we have a longer period of time. And I don't think it's fair, given the level of need, to necessarily look at this as just 1 year thing. My understanding, another issue which people can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is this grant it's an internal CIS grant, so they're essentially writing off, some
40%.
Is that right? Exactly. So. So I think it's more, it's a little financially simpler than if there was some outside party that was providing the grant. I guess the other thing I would say is that I have moved from being sort of cautious about this to being, or cautiously pessimistic to cautiously optimistic for two reasons. One is I did have the opportunity to attend the legislative presentation that CIS sent us all an invitation to. I think some people that are in the audience that helped present there, and I learned some things about CIS that we hadn't learned in the presentations here. Perhaps the most interesting to me was while they are national in scope, Pennsylvania and particularly the Lehigh Valley is really their core area. And in fact, they're working with more students here in Pennsylvania, I believe, than in all of California. Or excuse me, they're working with more students in the Lehigh Valley than they are in all of California. And so I think that means that there's a lot of attention that will accrue to this program in our schools, and I wouldn't want to I would want to take advantage of that. The other thing that I've thought about since the last presentation is I think it's actually really quite important that we develop this in the middle schools. We've seen a lot of the nature of the board is that people come with problems that need to be solved in the district, and my own sense that has developed in the years I've been on the board is that too often our solution starts at the high school. And it strikes me that that is too late for lots of things. You know, I think that that's true in a lot of our curricular needs, for example. And it certainly is true when it comes to mental health. And so one of the things that it seems to me going into the middle schools does is it reduces the future need that we're going to have at the high school, and it also leverages the investment we're making at the high school because it sets the it sets the foundation for that to be more effective as well. And so in some ways I think we are improving the investment we've already made at the high school by going into the high school, or excuse me, by going into the middle school. So I'm not 100% committed to this program. I would very interested in 2-year or 4-year outcomes that we can have at the end of this contract, but I'll be supporting this motion.
Mr. Jankowski.
I had the privilege of being in the audience during the presentation, and again, as others have mentioned, I share the concerns that have been expressed, as well as the hopes and the good intentions of this program. And one of the things that struck me that was said during the presentation is that this is a problem. There was a comment made about, well, it wasn't like this 20, 30 years ago when I was a student. It's the problem that seems to be getting worse every year. And I'm wondering if this could be an opportunity if we proceed during these next 3 years to kind of work in cooperation with CIS to determine, what is the cause of the problem? Is there something we can do in the district to help treat the student body as a whole, or prepare the student body as a whole, or address these concerns and issues as a whole, whether it be curriculum or programs available through the school, so that's not just something that's done on a student-by-student basis, but it's done as a student body basis, and kind of focus on why is it getting worse, and what can we do to address that, and use these opportunities to see if that's something we can work on with CIS, if there's something that they're willing to do to cooperate with us.
Anyone else? I'd like to make a couple comments. I agree, just touch briefly on some things other people have said. Effective measures, I believe we had a vigorous discussion about that in the last meeting, and I think a number of us would like to see better benchmarks or better discussion of the effectiveness of the program, and I would agree with that. I do want to point out, I think calling this, yes, it's not inaccurate to call community mental health, but it's very real issues with students that impact their ability to learn. And I think from that standpoint, it's definitely something that comes under the purview of the school district to address. I also share Ms. Bowman's concerns about, dangling a grant in front of us. Oh, we don't want to miss that. But I would point out that this was on, I think it was one person in the middle school from CIS was on the district priorities in a past budget, and it didn't make the cut. And this obviously has advantages from equity and not having one person covering two schools for about the same amount of money. So I think there's some advantages, and I think the 3-year time frame should give us enough time to evaluate the program and have some data that does go to the problem of is it effective? Is this a valuable place to put resources? And so I will be supporting this motion. Are there any other comments, questions? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
No.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
8 ayes, 1 nay.
The motion passes. Ms. Campbell?
I just wanted to take a moment, and I mean this sincerely, and thank the board, not just for the discussion tonight, but in general. I and our administrative team really always appreciate the open-minded way in which I think the members of our board approach a topic. So we oftentimes come together. We might be on very different pages, and I appreciate the way in which you listen carefully, ask incredibly deep and thoughtful questions, because you truly have a desire to want to learn more, and then hearing that people even go out, and I recognize that you do your own learning as well. Certainly the feedback, the discussion tonight provided our administrative team with further feedback regarding the direction you would like to see us take the program. I appreciate the importance of metrics and measurement of a program. Oftentimes, I think many of us may implement programs without really being mindful in terms of what growth or what change we hope to see. So that was certainly a great takeaway from tonight. And with regard to the questions that the board has had, not only about community in schools, but with other topics, I can assure you our administrative team always does our very best job to get you information that ultimately will answer your question. That one question that's out there, which can be a really tricky one, and we even discussed this with communities and schools in terms of, we can share with you data regarding the number of contacts that students who are in mental health crisis may have with the communities and schools individual. And I understand that from some community perspective, that may be just that. It's like an interaction or a contact. To answer the question of, okay, well, how did we help that kid or that one student? I think that's really important just to think about, because if we think about it the flip way in terms of what may have happened if we didn't have supports in place, could be devastating. And so, again, just thank you for the great conversation. I think we have great direction and are really excited to move forward.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward to the CIS EHS contract. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Ballard?
I will point out that I'm willing to allow the high school to go on for one more year simply because we need the time to get some kind of measurement. But we don't have to measure the direct effect on one person. We can look at the overall statistics for the high school, and we can say that we've had fewer truancies, we've had fewer incidents in the high school, we've had fewer fights, we can look at some of the things that we think this mental health program is attempting to help resolve. And find out whether or not we're seeing any change there. It doesn't have to be anything about any individual. It can be aggregate statistics about what's going on in the school and determine whether or not we're seeing any major changes in those statistics. If we're engaged in a major program, we would expect to see some kind of result. And that's what I'm talking about, not the individual cases or what we did for one student. I'm looking for aggregate measurements that say that the program overall is having some effect that we can consider measurable in the schools.
Yep. Okay. Any other comments? Ms. Baumann?
I actually wouldn't expect this program to have big macro effects. It's by design to be a caseload of, 60 students. So, I mean, that was really what underlined all my questions. I think where we're going to see results is those specific students would hopefully have more days in school. Maybe their grades would go up. I don't know what the other measures are. Those are just my non-expert mind coming up with two that we could potentially measure. There's probably other things. I would be kind of surprised if it went beyond that. This is at the high school level, that's 60 kids out of how many thousand do we have? So is it really going to affect the overall truancy or fights, or maybe, but that would be like, I think beyond expected. But what I would hope this does is shows us that there's a real effect in the number of students who are actually participating in the program.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
I probably should have mentioned this earlier, said something earlier in the last conversation, but I was having a hard time figuring out how to put this into words. We're talking a lot about statistics and data, and that is certainly all very well and good and part of making an educated decision, and that the whole process of making a decision, that's certainly something you want to have at your disposal. But there are certain times in the classroom where data is only a piece of the puzzle, and it then becomes hard to measure the impact of a particular program or the impact of a particular teacher, or in this case, the impact of a particular medical health professional who may be partnering with or part of communities and schools. And we heard last week, or last meeting, from communities and schools, and talked about the impact that they've had. Granted, it was very limited data for here in East Penn, but we heard about their impact in other districts as well. But then tonight we heard from two teachers who see this as a need for their students at the middle school level. And we have a lot of folks here tonight that are also from the middle school who are interested in hearing a lot of this discussion. And at a certain point, we have to say, okay, we've got some data, that's good. What other data do we need? Let's figure out a way to get it. And in the meantime, let's trust the professionals that are working the front lines of this need that we all agree is a need. Let's trust them and listen to them to say, A, what do they need? And B, these things that they need, what data do they have that so that they can say that, yes, this is going to work, or yes, we think this is going to work, or this has worked. And I think we heard quite a bit of that. So while you heard feedback on data and numbers, and we saw that in a graphical form, I think it's just as valid to consider the data, the data from folks who are living this every day and seeing this in our kids every day. So I probably should have said that earlier. It doesn't change my my vote or my thought on the current motion in front of us now, but that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to business operations, item O. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Discussion? Questions? Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, I raised the question regarding the athletic coverage. I had passed an article along to Mr. Saul some time ago about insurance underwriters moving away from covering concussions and head trauma for a number of the sports programs, football, lacrosse, soccer, field hockey, et cetera. And I would like to know that our coverage is either inclusive of those head trauma considerations, or if it's not, then we need to really give some serious consideration to how would we deal with such an event, because it is, as my son has gone through 2 concussions, is life-altering, and it is not something that goes away, and it may reoccur, and I don't want the district to be exposed to those kinds of situations. So, Mr. Saul?
Excuse me. Yeah, the student accident policy, which is an accidental medical policy, does continue to provide coverage for concussion and head trauma as it has in the past, and that's directly from the carrier.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? I have a quick question. I apologize, I didn't get this in advance, but there's a significant reduction in the annual premium. Is that due to claims history, or is it easily?
Nope, that's an excellent observation. And there was another question, so if I can combine your question with an explanation and sort of wrap everything together, perhaps I'll do that. So I just want to give the board a brief history, because we have some newer members of the board who may not have the recent history. Go ahead. Keep going, okay. So for many years, the district had an insurance committee which was made up of insurance brokers from the area that advised the district. Last year, we put out an RFP and selected an individual broker and put them on a fixed fee basis rather than a commission basis. In my personal opinion, it takes the question out of your mind whether or not they're trying to upsell you in terms of insurance. Last year, we changed property and liability carriers. For many years, we were with a company called CM Regent. Before that, it was referred to as the PSBA plan, because PSBA had initially started that plan because there were very few insurance companies that were insuring school districts. So PSBA saw a need, and they started that. They have since spun that off and have sold that to CM Regent. We were with them for many years. Last year, we transitioned for the current year, to Utica National. Utica National's been very good. In the fall, when we had the flood claim in the high school, they've covered upwards of $2 million, and we continue to have some expenditures that we need to submit for that, so they've been very good to work with. So for the current year, we actually did not, Utica came back with a flat premium, so we did not market that. As I said, it remains that there are only really 3, maybe 4 companies in the marketplace that will insure school districts. So what happens is, if you go out every year and put it out for bid or proposal, there's a fatigue factor, and they will just quit quoting. So typically what I have done, and I think you will find it with many school districts, is about every 3 years, as long as you're not seeing significant premium spikes, you would go out and market that. If in the interim we see some anomaly with the carrier that's not occurring in the marketplace, certainly we would make a call on that under the advisement of our own knowledge of the insurance marketplace, but also under the advisement of our broker. This year, our broker came to us and said, you've been with the same workers' comp carrier for many years, which was CM Regent. Would you consider looking at an alternative compensation carrier? Workers' compensation, unlike the general liability, is much more flexible in general. So there are a number of other companies. They recommended 3 very well-performing companies that they have worked with in the past. And so we did put that out and marketed that. And they came back and recommended to us, and we had a meeting with work partners. So we were with CM Regent. We looked at work partners, and we're very pleased with the program that they set forth. They're very proactive in terms of working claims, et cetera. So we're recommending work partners, and actually that's where the primary reduction in cost came. It was a $75,000 annual reduction in workers' compensation premium. So that's where you see that. Yeah, I think I covered everything.
Yes, thanks for the explanation. Sure. Uh-oh, you generated more questions.
That's okay.
That's what happened.
Dr. Munson?
Yeah, so I had a question about the brokerage arrangement. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I like the idea of a non-commissioned broker, but I'm curious if they have a legally binding fiduciary responsibility to the district as a result of being a broker or not. I mean, that is, could they be taking fees from the insurance companies themselves for recommending, this insurance over another and so forth?
According to the agreement we have with them, no, they cannot take fees. So essentially what we've done is we've said, our premiums will be net of commissions, so you will not receive a commission. And last year, for instance, one of the companies that we dealt with, CM Regent, would not net the commission off, so they actually gave us a credit. So they received, commission from that company, and we only paid, we'll say, $8,000 in fees. We figured that out, but.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, I thought workman's comp was incident rated. In other words, the amount paid for workman's comp can change depending on your incident history over the years, so that somebody might try to buy in at a low price, and then when your incidents go up, you suddenly find that the next premium is much higher.
Right.
So we're only locked in for 1 year, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And so that incident rating, or the workers' compensation modifier, our modifier is actually relatively high here, so we are at the high end of that. So as you described it, if you're at the low end, there's the risk of buying in. But when we obtain quotes, they're all using the same modifier, so we're comparing an apple to an apple.
I know, but a $75,000 lower fee, sounds like a loss leader type of situation, where you buy in a little low rate so that the next year you can kick it up when you find the incident rate is higher than you would prefer for that lower rate. So I just want to make sure that we're watching that.
Yeah. There's two philosophies in terms of, especially like workers' compensation insurance. Some people like to stay with the same carrier for many years and feel that carrier will give them, very good rates year over year, or they'll undercut the competition. The other philosophy is to stay ahead of it. So you keep going with the loss leaders. And I can tell you, at one point I had been with 3 or 4 workers' comp carriers over, like a 6 or 7 year period. So you can figure which philosophy I was taking advantage of at that point. So I recognize what you're saying, and we will certainly continue to do that.
Okay, just as long as you're keeping an eye on it.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. May I have a motion for item A in curriculum, educational conferences?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Next up is the third reading and adoption of the updated board policies. Are there any comments before?
No comments.
Are there any questions before we have a motion?
That means there were no changes from the last time we...
There were no changes.
Are there any questions before we may have a motion then to approve the policies?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Baumann? Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to CLIU report. Ms. Bowman, do you have a?
That's me. You know, their last meeting was so fast that I took a bathroom break and came back and the meeting was over, so.
A lot of information.
It really wasn't that much time. So I will say that our board president, Mr. Bold, who has, I think, led the CLIU for many, many years, very charming person, runs a meeting clearly, very quickly, very efficiently, is not running for re-election in Parkland, so the board has to reorganize and someone has to be talked into running for board president. It doesn't look like there's a lot of takers, so we'll see what happens there, but other than that, there's really nothing else to report.
Are there any questions? Let's hope not. Okay, moving on to LCTI. Mr. Champagne, do you have an
Yes,
update?
the last meeting of the LCTI Joint Operating Committee was held on April 24th. Key items, the construction of the welding lab is proceeding on schedule with the erection of structural steel expected to be completed by late May or early June. I don't know if that's actually going to happen with all the wet weather we've been having, but they were pleased to suggest that they may even be a little ahead of schedule. We also had an opportunity to recognize outstanding co-op students. While there were no EHS students awarded an outstanding award, there were 9 EHS students who did participate in the co-op program this year, and they were recognized at that as well. We did approve the 2019-20 school calendar. I did bring up the debate that we had internally, but as you know, it was pointed out to me, the superintendents had gone through this before, as well as there are, how many districts, school districts in that? 7?
7.
7. So it's a juggling act, and they did recognize that, trying to minimize disruptions and keep as many academic days in the calendar as possible, but they did make, all the appropriate compromises along the way. We did made an offer to hire a new supervisor of technology, which is a key position up at LCTI. The individual is coming hopefully on board in the next month. As Ms. Campbell mentioned, the Skills USA signing was held on May 10th at DeSales University. And finally, Senior Recognition Night for the LCTI seniors will be held on May 30th at the PPL Center starting at 6:30. So any board members obviously are welcome to attend. It's a neat ceremony, and there will be, I'm sure, lots of interesting accolades given to the students. Thanks for my report.
Any questions for Mr. Champagne? Thank you. Moving on to motion to appoint an LCTI Joint Operating Committee member. I had not received anything before the meeting. Are there any takers at the meeting now?
Come on, Josh. Raise the hand.
Josh is interested. May I have a motion?
So moved.
To appoint Josh Levinson.
Yeah, exactly.
Did I hear a second?
Second.
And a third.
Any discussion?
I heard 8 seconds.
Any discussion?
Thank you.
Alan, will you call the roll?
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye. Hear that.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Thank you for
Josh.
stepping up. Next is the legislative report. Mr. Ballard?
Okay, to start with, there's a so-called package of charters bills in the House Education Committee that was considered today. I have not heard how the votes came. Some of these bills are kind of fair, and some of them aren't, and PSBA was still looking at them to try to determine whether or not we should try to fight them. But it's basically, since they've also passed EITC increment, we have to be on the watch, because these people are trying to replace public schools with so-called school choice. And I think that's mainly because when you come to them later on with complaints about not being provided the proper education for your children, they'll be able to tell you, you made the wrong choice. And they're therefore absolving themselves of all responsibility for their constitutional duty. More interesting, the state budget. This is being conducted in almost total secrecy at the moment. You know, there's a June 30th deadline. We've seen it come and go and spend months waiting for the results. There's a House Bill 790 that's supposed to be the vehicle for containing the new spending plan. However, the latest indications are that the bill will remain in the House Appropriations Committee until negotiations are finalized, which means it could be several weeks before we hear what the proposed bill is, and that still doesn't get it through the committees and onto the floor for some time. So it is expected that they will adopt something by June 30th. We'll try to keep you updated if we hear anything changing in that regard. There have been some movement in the State Board of Education. Some people don't realize we have a State Board of Education, but they do have some control over what we do. They are the body that takes the legislation, goes through PDE, and then the State Board of Education promulgates the regulations that are then passed on to us as what we have to do. And they adopted 2 resolutions in support of the administration's proposal to change the compulsory school age, a lowering of the age to enter school from 8 years to 6 years, and a resolution raising the minimum age at which students can drop out of school from 17 to 18 years. So that has implications in terms of our budgets, because it could be more people coming in for kindergarten and more people staying for their senior year. So we'll have to watch how that plays out, but that's one of the things they've done. They have received information from on PDE's recommendation for a satisfactory Keystone exam composite score, which would be used as one of the pathways to graduation under Act 158 of 2018. That's still not a required thing, but it is one of the pathways that will be possible. And it was noted that testing time was reduced by 20% this year for the PSSA tests, so they consider that to be a positive thing. But of more interest to us, then, the House of Representatives has passed a bill requiring CPR instruction in school systems, in high school. They've also passed, now this hasn't been law, you have to go through the Senate first, but I'm just saying what's out there in the pipeline. They've passed an EITC expansion of another $100 million of taxes that would be suborned to charter schools or private schools. Right to know financial information, they want to change that a bit to clarify that an agency's financial institution information, account numbers, routing numbers, credit card numbers, and PIN numbers can be redacted on submissions. It's been unclear for some time now. An individual's personal financial information, tax information is required by the state or federal government, as well as their contributions to health care or other benefits, retirement plans, investment options, and contributions to charitable organizations is confidential and not a public document. They want to make that clear too, so that people can't request, as has happened many years before, they've requested copies of all the W-2s for a school district. And if you'll remember, W-2s used to have the complete Social Security number on them, so it was a prime thing for identity fraud. This bill has been passed too. they have, the Senate has passed the Education Committee of the Senate has passed a school safety and security bill that to state that school entities may decide whether their school police and resource officers, including school security guards, may carry firearms while on school property. This has been a problem for some school districts who hire private security guards, not licensed police officers or certificated police officers, but private security firms, as to whether or not they could carry guns. And now it'll be, if that gets approved by the legislature, that'll be part of the ability for the school district to decide. So that's about it is happening now. We have no information on the budget. Nobody has any information on the budget. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Unless maybe it's Senator Brown, if you get him to, you know, I won't make the reference that I was going to make. But anyway, if you get him convivially enough to give you some inside information about what's happening with the Appropriations Committee, you might get some information, but other than that, nobody has a clue, so don't hold your breath. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Ballard? Thank you. Moving on to other items, appointment of treasurer. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Musso?
Staying on for another term. It's been the best budget process yet that I've been through. They've gotten continually better, and I greatly appreciate your service, not just to the district, but more selfishly to this board. Thank you.
I second that comment.
Third.
Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. We had announcements. We had an executive session before the meeting to cover employment issues, personnel issues. Our next regularly scheduled board meeting is Monday, June 10th, the day after graduation. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.